One way of drawing attention to a subject in a wildlife shot is to use a very wide aperture to get a shallow depth of field. Also, if you use a zoom lens as well, you tend to get a much softer background and a sharper foreground. But it's very hit and miss changing the aperture because you end up blurring important parts of the horse maybe as well as softening the background. So if you use something like f8, you can get the foreground and the background looking fairly sharp. We do have a little bit of blur in the background, but we can make that even stronger using Photoshop. And by blurring things in Photoshop, here's the blurred version, you can see now we've drawn attention to the horse and we've blurred the background. We've also created a soft blur on the horse's flank and we've blurred this area too. And the blurs are depending on distance, so this area here and this area here aren't as soft as the background, and the very far pixels there, the sky, are blurred even more, so we've got a graduation in our blur effect. And that's all done in Photoshop using layer masks and brush tools. There's a mask that's preserving the horse's details in the foreground, and the background area in white is nice and soft. And if I just click and have a look at the mask quickly, you can see that the grey areas are semi-transparent, and that's a great way of restoring detail to soft areas like the hair around the horse's mane. So there's quite a lot to do in this video, but I'll show you by starting with a source file which you'll find on the cover disk. It's called blur_before.jpg. So let's kick off by copying our background layer to start with, and to do that just drag the layer thumbnail to create a new layer, and that creates our copy. Next thing to do is to select the horse to create a mask that will protect the horse from being blurred later. And to do that, there's a very simple way. Just go to the quick selection tool and then click and spray over the horse to select it. You might need to hit tab to get rid of the floating windows so that they don't distract you. And if you end up selecting this bit of hill here, which you probably will, let me just get the horse's flank as well. There we go, just fine tune things by just clicking and spraying. There we go. Yeah, then pop up to here and subtract from selection, click and spray, and that then returns the hills to the unselected area. So we're now just selecting the horse. Don't worry too much about the fact that you've got some of the finer hairs missing on the horse's mane, because we're going to restore those later using the power of layer masks. So it's going to look fairly rough and ready like this. Let's just refine the edge by clicking the refine edge button at the top there, and let me just click default for the moment. Take a feather of around about 2 pixels like so. I click OK, and we've now softened the edge of our selection marquee there just to create a nice blend between the blur and the sharper pixels. Once you've refined your edge, then what we're going to do is inverse the selection. Select inverse, and now what's happening is we're selecting the sky and the horse is unselected, and that is going to actually create a mask to protect our horse. We could have just tried to select the background by clicking on it using the quick selection tool, but it's much more complex and there's much more variety there, so it was easier just to select the horse and then inverse the selection. Now to create the mask in elements, you have to cheat by pinching one from an adjustment layer, and that's very easy to do. Just click here, create a new adjustment layer called Levels, click OK, don't make any changes at all. All we're after is this lovely mask here, which has been created based on the selection. Now to apply that mask to the background copy layer, drag it below, then hold down Alt and click, and you'll see this little clipping icon appears. As soon as that does, just click and you've clipped the layer mask to background copy. Now to blur the background copy layer, click on it to target it and then go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and that pops the Gaussian Blur dialog box. Then just click to select an area like so, and then maybe around about 8 pixels. Obviously the higher value, the blurrier the background. That's over the top. That's a really shallow depth of field. So there's something around about 8.6, something like that. 8.9 should do the trick. You can see a preview of the before and after just to make sure you're happy. Click to see that. So we're blurring the background but keeping the horse sharp thanks to the protection of the black layer mask. Click OK. To create a graduated blur effect, make the even more distant sky look even more blurred, let's just select the sky, and to do that it's easier just to go to background for the moment, grab this tool here to make a quick selection, and then just click and spray over the sky like so. If you try to select the blurry version, you probably end up selecting the horse's ear. So click on background to start with, make the selection, and then go back to background copy. Let's just soften the edge again. I'm just going to set that to around about a feather of 4. Otherwise you might get a sharp line between the blurred and the even more blurred version. So click OK to apply the change. Oh, a good tip when you're applying blur to selected areas is to Control and H to hide the selection, and you can still then apply the blur, and you can see how the edge is shaping up. Sometimes you'll get a sharp edge and you can't notice that necessarily with the marching ants of the selection marquee moving around. So Control H is very handy because it keeps the selection active, it just hides it. And once you've finished making a blur into that distant area, then Control D to deselect the marquee. So we've now got a graduation there. We've got a soft background and a softer distance and a sharp horse. So we've got a nice variety of graduated blur going into the distance. Now, if you were using a camera lens to actually create this effect, then you would actually have a much more subtle graduation, because some of the back of the horse here would also be nice and soft, given the distance between his head and the rear of the horse's body. So, to mimic that effect, we can click on the layer mask and start using that to create a graduation. So, select the brush tool by pressing B or clicking here. Choose an opacity of around about maybe 20%. If you set the foreground color to white, it will make a huge difference there. But now click on the mask and then take the brush size to around about 400 and click and spray. Let me just zoom in and show you what's going on here. We're actually gently blurring the back of the horse, but keeping the rest of the area untouched. And you can see we're getting a sort of semi-grey effect there on the layer mask. So that's a cool way of selectively blurring parts of the horse, but making them not quite as blurred as the background filter was. Now let's go down by holding the hand tool. We can have a look at this rock here. I'm just going to change the foreground colour to black. That gives us a slightly different version of grey there, and you can click and spray and gently restore some detail there, because it would be partly blurred. It's a little bit of a distance away from the horse's head, but it's not as blurred as the background. Then what we can do is restore detail that's hidden around the edge of the horse. I'm taking a smaller brush tip of around about 175 pixels, maybe 150, and taking the opacity right down to maybe 11%, and just click and spray, and that will slowly, if you keep spraying, just bring out some of those missing details there without removing the blur from the background too much. If you want to see what the mask is actually doing, click on the mask with the Alt key, and you can actually see, if I just hold the hand tool there by holding space, I can get the navigation to have a look at this area here, and you can see it's semi-grey there, so it's partially transparent, and it's revealing some of the main horse and some of the blurred background as well. It's combining the two in a very subtle way, so that's very cool. Let me just click back on background copy, then back on the layer mask, hold the space bar to get the hand tool, and let's try and restore some of these details here. We're on the mask and we're just clicking and spraying, and it just brings out some of that finer fur without creating a sharp blend between the horse and the background. That's a great way of bringing out these finer furry details. It'd be really difficult to select using the quick selection tool, but the layer mask helps you find those areas with much greater control. It's much more subtle. And if there's a bit of a halo around the edge of the horse, like you can see here because of the blur, just click and spray with our very soft brush on the mask just to get rid of the halo, but keep the background nice and blurred and the horse looking nice and sharp. There's a little bit of halo on the ear there, and that subtly blends it. Oh, another hair here we can restore very gently, and you can see there on the mask, if I alt click again, we've got some very subtle soft grey, but that's enough to restore the missing hairs. So finally, let's have a look at the before and after. There's the after with a graduated blur. You've got different blur versions on the rocks, the horse, the background, and even the sky, and that gives you a much more realistic shallow depth of field effect. And there's the original shot with a little bit more clutter and detail in the background. And here's our after again, with finer details like the hairs still visible. So it's quite a subtle effect, the masking effect, but it's very effective and very powerful at enabling you to restore fine detail and also create graduated blur effects. And the lovely thing about layer masks is you've got much more control than you would have if you just shot using shallow depth of field on location, because there, whatever you get is what you're stuck with. So if the background of the horse was blurred, you couldn't restore any more detail to it due to the camera's shallow depth of field. But using layer masks, you can make as much of a change as you like, and the cool thing is as well is it's non-destructive. So this layer mask is going to be saved with the file. If you save it as a layered file, as a TIFF or a Photoshop document, you can then open it up later and you can fine-tune it by using brushes and changing the filters on the background copy layer, for example, and you can turn off the mask to see the before version, turn it on again to see the after, or if you shift click on the mask, you can even disable it to see the blurred version in its entirety. Okay, so lots of different options there, all thanks to the creative and controlling powers of layer masks.